They say the heaviest betrayals wear a smile and kiss you goodnight. She spent her husband's entire fortune on her lover, believing she had everything under control. But on the day of the will reading, as the lawyer began to speak, a chilling shiver ran down her spine. The sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the rain-slicked streets of downtown San Francisco, its tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Inside, Nathaniel Lancaster sat in contemplative silence, his piercing hazel eyes fixed on the city lights reflecting off the towering glass and steel structures along Market Street. The rhythmic tap of raindrops on the roof provided a somber soundtrack to his thoughts. As the car approached the towering Lancaster Center, Nathaniel's gaze drifted to the imposing structure that bore his name. The 58-story monument of chrome and glass stood as a testament to his triumph, a legacy he had forged from nothing. At 47, Nathaniel Lancaster was at the zenith of his career, a self-made billionaire whose name was synonymous with power and innovation in the tech world. The Rolls-Royce pulled up to the private entrance, and before the chauffeur could open the door, Nathaniel was already stepping out into the misty Bay Area night. He moved with determination, his custom Tom Ford suit barely creasing as he strode into the grand marble lobby. The security guard greeted him with a respectful nod. "Good evening, Mr. Lancaster." Nathaniel acknowledged him with a slight nod, his mind already turning toward the challenges that awaited him upstairs. Inside the mirrored elevator, he caught a glimpse of his reflection. The face that stared back was rugged and distinguished, shaped by decades of drive and discipline. His thick dark hair, streaked with silver, was flawlessly styled, untouched by the damp air outside. The elevator ascended swiftly to the penthouse floor, and as the doors opened, Nathaniel stepped into the familiar sanctuary of his executive suite. The office was a harmonious blend of sleek modernism and old-world elegance, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the San Francisco skyline. He walked to his desk, a vast slab of white Italian marble, and sank into the soft leather of his chair. For a moment, he allowed himself a brief respite. His eyes fell on the framed photo resting on the edge of his desk. It was a picture of him and his wife, Evelyn, taken during their summer getaway at their private villa in Lake Como. Evelyn's bright smile beamed back at him, her auburn hair cascading down her shoulders, green eyes sparkling with what seemed to be pure joy. They looked like the ideal couple, the embodiment of success and happiness. Nathaniel's fingers brushed the edge of the frame, a faint smile touching his lips as he remembered that day. It had been one of those rare occasions when he'd managed to pull away from the chaos of work to focus entirely on his wife and the life they had built. Evelyn had seemed so vibrant then, so full of energy and light. Moments like that reminded him why he worked so tirelessly, pushing his limits day after day. But just as quickly as the warmth of the memory came, it faded, replaced by a quiet unease that had been growing in recent months. Something had changed between them, a subtle shift that he couldn't quite name. Evelyn's smiles had grown less sincere. Her kisses felt more like habit than desire. At first he had chalked it up to paranoia, a side effect of the stress, the long hours, the relentless demands of his business. But lately, the feeling had become too persistent to ignore. Shaking off the unease, Nathaniel turned his attention to the stack of documents on his desk. The latest financial reports from his various ventures lay in front of him, demanding his scrutiny. As he began to pore over the numbers, his brow furrowed. Something wasn't right. The discrepancies were subtle, easy to miss for someone without his level of experience, but to Nathaniel, they stood out like warning signs. He reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the speed dial for his CFO. It was late, well past midnight, but this couldn't wait. Just as he was about to make the call, his personal cell phone buzzed with a message. It was from Evelyn. "Don't wait up, darling. Girls' night running late. See you in the morning?" XO. Nathaniel stared at the message, a mix of emotions washing over him. Part of him was relieved. He wouldn't have to explain another late night at the office. But there was something else too. A flicker of suspicion. Doubt. He shook it off, chiding himself for being paranoid. Evelyn had always been social. Her charity work often kept her out late. It was one of the things he admired about her devotion to causes, her passion for giving back to the community. Pushing the doubts aside, Nathaniel returned his focus to the financial irregularities. He immersed himself in the figures, losing track of time as he dug deeper into the data. It was nearly 3 a.m. when he finally leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. He had uncovered a pattern, a series of unauthorized withdrawals and transfers buried deep within the complex framework of his financial empire. The amounts were staggering, totaling millions. They had been siphoned off with such subtlety that they had remained hidden until now. Nathaniel's mind raced. Embezzlement? A sophisticated cyber attack? Or something more insidious? He had made enemies over the years. Success always invited envy, but this felt different. It felt personal. As he contemplated his next move, his gaze drifted once more to the photograph of Evelyn. For a brief moment, an unthinkable thought flashed through his mind, but he dismissed it almost instantly. Evelyn was many things, but she would never betray him. Their love, their life together, it was the foundation of everything he had built. Determined to uncover the truth, Nathaniel began formulating a plan. He would need to move cautiously, methodically. If someone was working against him, he couldn't afford to alert them. This investigation would have to be done in absolute secrecy. He would trust no one until he had undeniable proof. Just as he was about to shut down his computer and head home, an email notification appeared in the corner of the screen. The sender was unknown. The subject line was blank. Against his better judgment, Nathaniel clicked to open it. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was a photo, clearly taken earlier that night. In it, he saw Evelyn, her auburn hair unmistakable, entering an upscale hotel. But she wasn't alone. A man, tall and dark-haired, had his arm around her waist, guiding her through the revolving door. The man's face was turned away from the camera, but the intimacy of the gesture was undeniable. Nathaniel felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. He stared at the image, willing it to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. But deep down he knew. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture he didn't want to believe. With trembling hands, he reached for his phone again, this time pulling up his banking app. He navigated to the joint accounts he shared with Evelyn, accounts he rarely checked himself. What he saw confirmed his worst fears: massive withdrawals, extravagant purchases, transfers to unknown accounts, all bearing Evelyn's digital signature. The reality struck Nathaniel like a physical blow. The woman he loved, the partner he had trusted with everything, had been systematically draining their finances. And for what? Whom? The man in the photo? How long had this been happening? As the first rays of dawn crept over the San Francisco skyline, Nathaniel Lancaster sat in his office, his world crumbling around him. The empire he had built, the life he had so carefully crafted, it all suddenly felt hollow. He had always prided himself on his business instincts, his ability to read people, to see what others missed. How had he been so blind in his own home? The buzzing of his phone jolted him from his thoughts. It was a text from Evelyn. "On my way home, darling. Breakfast together?" Nathaniel stared at the message, his mind spinning. In that moment, he made a decision. He wouldn't confront her. Not yet. If Evelyn was capable of this level of deception, who knew what else she might be capable of if cornered? No, he needed to be careful, strategic. He needed more information before he acted. He had to understand the full scope of her betrayal. As he stood to leave his office, Nathaniel caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. The man staring back at him looked older, more worn than the one who had walked in just hours earlier. But there was something else too, a new edge in his eyes, a steeliness in his jaw. Nathaniel Lancaster had built his empire from nothing once before, and if he had to, he would do it again. But this time, he would ensure that those who betrayed him paid dearly. As he stepped into the elevator, a plan was already beginning to take shape in his mind. Evelyn, her mysterious lover, whoever else was involved. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. The elevator doors closed, and as Nathaniel descended to the lobby, he made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. And when he did, there would be a reckoning unlike anything San Francisco had ever seen. What Nathaniel didn't know was that as he stepped out into the early morning light of the city he had once conquered, his journey for truth and vengeance was about to take him down a path darker and more treacherous than he could have ever imagined. The game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than he could possibly know. Across town, in a luxurious suite at the Fairmont San Francisco, Evelyn Lancaster stirred from her slumber. She reached for her phone, checking the message she had sent to Nathaniel. No response. A small frown creased her flawless features as she turned to the man sleeping beside her. "Landon," she whispered, running her fingers through his thick, dark hair. "Wake up, we need to talk." The man opened his eyes, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "What's wrong, beautiful? Having second thoughts?" Evelyn shook her head, her expression hardening. "No, but I think we need to move faster. Nathaniel's not stupid. We can't risk him figuring things out before we're ready." Landon sat up, pulling Evelyn close. "Don't worry, baby. Everything's going according to plan. Soon we'll have it all, and Nathaniel Lancaster will be nothing but a distant memory." As the sun rose over San Francisco, casting long shadows across the city's iconic skyline, the stage was set for a battle of wits, wealth, and will. Nathaniel Lancaster, the self-made billionaire, was about to face the fight of his life. And unbeknownst to him, the enemies he faced were far closer to home than he could have ever imagined. The wheels of fate had been set in motion, and there was no turning back. In the world of high finance and even higher stakes, only one thing was certain: when the dust settled, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of the Lancaster penthouse as Evelyn stirred her coffee, lost in thought. From her vantage point on the balcony, she had a breathtaking view of the bay, the waters of San Francisco shimmering like a blanket of diamonds in the early light. It was a view that had once filled her with awe and gratitude. Now, it felt like a gilded cage, a constant reminder of the life she had grown to resent. Her phone buzzed softly on the glass table beside her. A message from Landon. "Miss you already. Can't wait to see you again." A small smile tugged at her lips as she quickly typed a reply, her heart racing with the thrill of their secret affair. Landon was everything Nathaniel wasn't: young, exciting, passionate. Where Nathaniel was all business and hard edges, Landon was charm and adventure. He made her feel alive in ways she hadn't felt in years. As she set her phone down, Evelyn caught her reflection in the balcony's glass doors. At 38, she was still strikingly beautiful, her auburn hair and sharp green eyes turning heads wherever she went. But lately she'd begun to notice the first signs of age creeping in. A fine line here, a trace of fatigue there. It terrified her. The thought of growing old, of losing the beauty that had always been her most reliable asset. The sound of footsteps pulled her from her reverie. Nathaniel emerged onto the balcony, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit despite the early hour. He placed a gentle kiss on her cheek, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Good morning, darling," he said, his voice distracted. "I'm afraid I'll have to miss breakfast again. There's a situation at the office that needs my immediate attention." Evelyn fought to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Of course, Nathaniel. When isn't there a situation at the office?" If Nathaniel noticed the edge in her tone, he didn't show it. He was already scrolling through his phone, undoubtedly reviewing the day's agenda. "I'll make it up to you, I promise. How about dinner at Bennu this weekend? We can celebrate the Lynn deal." "The Lynn deal?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow, feigning interest. Nathaniel's eyes lit up the way they always did when he talked about business. "Yes, it's a game changer. If we pull it off, it'll open new markets across East Asia. It's been keeping me busy, but the potential? It's enormous." Evelyn nodded, though her mind had already wandered. Long ago, she'd stopped trying to keep up with Nathaniel's constant deals and acquisitions. Once, she had been his confidant, his partner in every sense. Now, she felt more like a trophy, a beautiful accessory to parade around at galas and fundraising events. "That sounds wonderful, dear," she said, forcing a smile. "I'm sure it'll be a great success." Nathaniel checked his watch and frowned. "I've got to run. I'll call you later." With a quick peck on the cheek, he was gone, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts and the breathtaking view of the city sprawling out beneath her. As soon as she heard the elevator doors close, Evelyn reached for her phone again. Her fingers flew across the screen. "Lunch. Same place. I need to see you." Across town, in a sleek high-rise overlooking the Embarcadero, Landon Royce lounged in his sunlit penthouse, a satisfied smirk on his face as he read Evelyn's message. At 32, Landon was the image of modern success, dashingly handsome, charismatic, and dangerously persuasive. And Evelyn Lancaster was by far his most promising mark. He had first met her at a charity gala 6 months ago, scouting for potential targets, wealthy women starved for attention, yearning for something more. In Evelyn, he had struck gold. It hadn't taken long to recognize the signs: the forced smiles, the empty charm, the loneliness behind her eyes. Her life was polished, luxurious, but utterly unfulfilling. What had started as a carefully calculated seduction had unexpectedly evolved into something deeper. Landon found himself genuinely drawn to Evelyn's wit, her intelligence, the fire within her that Nathaniel had long ignored. Of course, the fact that she had access to one of the largest fortunes in San Francisco didn't hurt either. As he got ready for lunch, a faint twinge of guilt flickered inside him. Perhaps, but he pushed it aside. In his world, there was no room for sentiment. Evelyn was a means to an end, a key to the wealth and power he had always craved. And if he had to break her heart to get it, well, that was just business. Meanwhile, in the steel and glass tower of Lancaster Center, Nathaniel sat in his office, surrounded by a team of his top executives. The atmosphere was tense. The faces around the table were grim as they reviewed the latest financial reports. "As you can see, Mr. Lancaster," his CFO, Daniel Kim, was saying, "the discrepancies we've uncovered are substantial. We're looking at losses in the tens of millions over just the past 6 months." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had suspected something was off, but the magnitude of the problem was far greater than he had imagined. "And we're certain this isn't just a clerical mistake?" he asked. Daniel shook his head. "I'm afraid not, sir. We've combed through the numbers repeatedly. This appears to be a deliberate and sophisticated effort to siphon money from the company." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Nathaniel's eyes scanned the faces of his team, searching for any sign of deceit or betrayal. These were people he had trusted for years, individuals who had stood by him as he built his empire from the ground up. Could one of them be behind this? "All right," Nathaniel said, his voice calm despite the storm brewing within him. "I want a full audit of every department, every account, every transaction. Leave no stone unturned, and this stays between us. For now. I don't want to spark panic until we know exactly what we're up against." As the team filed out of the conference room, Nathaniel called out to his assistant. "Sarah, cancel my dinner plans for tonight, and I need you to gather everything you can on our employees, financial activity, bank records, investment portfolios, recent large purchases, anything that might raise a flag." Sarah nodded, her expression a mix of concern and unwavering focus. "Of course, Mr. Lancaster. Anything else?" Nathaniel paused. Sarah had been with him for over a decade. One of the few people he still trusted. "Yes," he said finally. "I need you to discreetly monitor Evelyn's spending. Personal accounts, credit cards, everything. And Sarah, this is strictly confidential. No one can know, not even her." If Sarah was surprised by the request, she didn't show it. "Understood, sir. I'll get the information to you as soon as possible." As she left the office, Nathaniel turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows. His reflection was superimposed over the San Francisco skyline. The empire he had built was under siege, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much darker. Across the city, in a quiet corner of the exclusive Epic Steak, Evelyn and Landon sat close together, their conversation low and intimate. Evelyn's eyes sparkled as Landon regaled her with tales of his latest exploits. Skydiving over Dubai, racing exotic cars through the streets of Monaco. It was a world so far removed from the carefully curated life she led with Nathaniel, and she savored every word. "You should have been there," Landon said. "Evie," Landon was saying, his hand resting casually on hers. "The adrenaline rush, it's like nothing you've ever experienced. It makes you feel alive." Evelyn sighed, a wistful smile on her face. "It sounds incredible, Landon. I wish I could experience something like that." Landon leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "Why can't you? We could go together. I know a place in the Caribbean, completely private. Just imagine it, you and me, the open ocean, no one to answer to but ourselves." Her breath hitched at the vivid picture he painted. Waves crashing, sun-warmed skin, freedom. A life without judgment, without Nathaniel. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn let herself be swept away by the fantasy. But reality returned quickly, cold and sobering. "You know I can't," she said. "Nathaniel would never allow it. He barely lets me out of his sight as it is." Landon's jaw tightened. His hand flexed slightly over hers, just once. A flicker, anger or impatience, crossed his face. It was gone in an instant, but Evelyn felt its chill linger. A flash of something, frustration, maybe anger, flickered across Landon's face. But it vanished so quickly she wasn't sure it had been there at all. "Evie," he said gently, "when are you going to start living for yourself? You're not Nathaniel's possession. You deserve to be happy, to be free." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But chains forged in comfort and guilt were not easily broken. Evelyn looked down at her plate, conflict etched across her features. "It's not that simple, Landon. Nathaniel has given me everything. I can't just throw that away." Landon's voice softened, taking on the persuasive tone he knew Evelyn couldn't resist. "I'm not asking you to throw anything away, beautiful. I'm asking you to take what's rightfully yours. Nathaniel's fortune. You've earned every bit of it. All these years standing by him, playing the perfect wife. Don't you think it's time you got to enjoy it?" The words struck like a tuning fork inside her, resonating with the dissonance she'd kept buried for years. Her nails dug slightly into her palm beneath the table. Evelyn's resolve began to crumble. Landon's words spoke to desires she had buried for years, the longing for freedom, for excitement, for a life she could call her own. And hadn't she earned it? Hadn't she sacrificed her dreams, her very identity, to be Mrs. Nathaniel Lancaster? "What if it all goes wrong?" she whispered, her voice cracking, not just from fear, but from the weight of longing. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Landon's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. He had her. "I'm suggesting we take control of our own destiny, Evie. Nathaniel's not the only one who knows how to move money around. With your access and my skills, we could set ourselves up for life. No more obligations. Just you and me, living the life we deserve." Each word sank deeper into her skin. Dangerous, thrilling. She knew this was the point of no return. And yet, she nodded, slowly, deliberately. As Landon laid out his plan, Evelyn felt a heady mix of fear and exhilaration. What he was proposing wasn't just an affair. It was a full betrayal of everything she had built her life upon for the last 20 years. But when she looked into Landon's eyes, she saw a future of passion and possibility. A life where she was more than just a beautiful prop in someone else's story. "Okay," she said at last, the decision made. "Tell me what I need to do." As Evelyn and Landon plotted their future, oblivious to the world around them, they failed to notice the woman seated at the bar. Her attention appeared fixed on her phone, but her gaze was sharp and watchful. Sarah, Nathaniel Lancaster's loyal assistant, quietly raised her phone and snapped a photo of the couple. Her heart heavy, she knew exactly what this image would mean to her boss. Back at Lancaster Center, Nathaniel was in the middle of a tense conference call with his legal team when Sarah entered the office, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, her voice steady despite the clear distress behind her eyes, "I have the information you requested. I think you need to see this right away." Nathaniel excused himself from the call and took the tablet Sarah handed him. As he swiped through the photos and financial statements, his expression darkened. The last remnants of doubt vanished. The woman he had loved, the partner he had entrusted with everything, was systematically tearing down the life they had built together. "Sarah," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "set up a meeting with Jack Wren. Tell him it's urgent." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. She recognized the name, San Francisco's most feared and relentless private investigator. "Of course, Mr. Lancaster. Is there anything else?" Nathaniel's eyes, now ice-cold, met hers. "Yes, cancel all my appointments for the next week. It seems I have personal matters that require my attention." As Sarah quietly left the office, Nathaniel turned toward the window. His reflection was barely visible in the fading daylight. The man staring back at him was not the confident, controlled executive of that morning. This was a man on the edge, a man whose world had just collapsed beneath him. But as the shock began to subside, something else rose to take its place. A cold, precise fury began to build inside him. Nathaniel Lancaster had built his empire from scratch. He had faced down cutthroat competitors and survived more corporate battles than most could imagine. If Evelyn thought she could strip all that away, she was about to be painfully disillusioned. Nathaniel had not come this far, had not sacrificed so much to be undone by betrayal. As the lights of San Francisco began to twinkle across the skyline, he made a silent vow. He would uncover every detail of Evelyn and Landon's scheme. He would let them believe they were winning, let them think they had outmaneuvered him. And then, when the timing was perfect, he would destroy them both. This wasn't just about wealth or business anymore. This was personal, and Nathaniel Lancaster intended to ensure that those who betrayed him paid the ultimate price. As night fell over San Francisco, the city buzzed with its usual rhythm, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in its midst. In 3 different places, 3 individuals set plans into motion that would change the course of their lives forever. In the Lancaster penthouse, Evelyn sat at her vanity, methodically removing her makeup, mentally preparing herself for the role she would have to play in the coming weeks. She caught sight of the massive diamond ring on her left hand, a gleaming symbol of the life she was planning to leave behind. For a fleeting moment, doubt slipped in. Was she truly ready to abandon everything for a man she had only known for 6 months? But then she remembered the thrill of Landon's touch, the promise of a life filled with passion and adventure. Evelyn thought about the years she had spent playing the perfect wife, always in Nathaniel's shadow, never truly living for herself. No, there was no going back now. She had made her choice, and she would see it through to the end. Across town in his sleek apartment, Landon pored over financial documents, his mind spinning with possibilities. Evelyn's inside knowledge had opened doors he had never dreamed of. With her access, he could siphon off millions, maybe even billions, without Nathaniel ever suspecting a thing. It was the score of a lifetime, and Landon intended to seize every bit of it. But as he worked, a persistent doubt gnawed at the back of his mind. He had always prided himself on staying detached, on viewing his targets as nothing more than stepping stones. But Evelyn was different. Despite himself, he had come to care for her, genuinely. He wanted to give her the life she deserved. It was a dangerous feeling in his world, one that could cloud judgment and lead to fatal mistakes. Landon shook his head, forcing the emotion away. There would be time for all that later, after they were far away and rich beyond their wildest dreams. For now, he needed to remain sharp, to anticipate Nathaniel's every move. Meanwhile, in his office at Lancaster Center, Nathaniel sat alone in the darkness, lit only by the glow of his computer screen. The initial wave of shock and heartbreak over Evelyn's betrayal had long since given way to a cold, sharpened rage. He had always understood the ruthless nature of the business world, that loyalty was rare and betrayal common. But never had he imagined the greatest threat to everything he'd built would come from within his own home. As he reviewed the evidence Sarah had compiled, a plan began to form in his mind. It was dangerous, risky enough to bring everything crashing down if it failed. But if it worked, it would not only protect his fortune, it would devastate Evelyn and Landon in ways they could never recover from. Nathaniel picked up his phone and dialed a number he had hoped never to use. After 3 rings, a gravelly voice answered. "Ren here." "Jack, it's Nathaniel Lancaster. I need your services. This is delicate, and it requires absolute discretion." There was a brief pause before Ren's voice returned, cool and professional. "I'm listening, Mr. Lancaster." As Nathaniel began to outline his plan, a grim satisfaction settled in his chest. Evelyn and Landon thought they were in control, that they were playing a game they could win. But they were about to discover just how outmatched they truly were. In Nathaniel's world, there were no second chances, no space for forgiveness. They had made their move. Now they would pay the price. The stage was set. The players were in position. In the weeks ahead, a battle would unfold in the shadows of San Francisco's glittering skyline. A battle of wits, of will, and of relentless determination. And when the dust settled, only one side would remain standing. As Nathaniel hung up the phone, he allowed himself a small, cold smile. Let Evelyn and Landon savor their fleeting victory. Soon enough, they would understand the true cost of crossing Nathaniel Lancaster. The clock on his desk ticked steadily, counting down the moments until the real game began. In the world of high finance and even higher stakes, time was the most valuable currency of all. and Nathaniel intended to make every second count. The early morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nathaniel's office, casting long shadows across the polished walnut desk. He sat motionless, his intense hazel eyes fixed on the computer screen before him. The soft hum of the air system and the distant stirrings of San Francisco coming to life below were the only sounds breaking the heavy silence. For hours, he had been buried in financial reports, bank statements, and transaction logs. What he uncovered chilled him to the core. The discrepancies were no longer subtle, they were damning. Millions had been siphoned off through an intricate network of hidden accounts and shadow transfers. At first, he had assumed it was corporate sabotage, a mole inside his company perhaps. But as he dug deeper, a far more devastating truth began to surface. Nathaniel's fingers flew across the keyboard, tracking the flow of stolen funds. Each revelation stabbed deeper. Luxury purchases in Paris, private jet rentals to secluded destinations, enormous cash withdrawals from hidden accounts, and woven through it all, one name surfaced over and over again. Evelyn Lancaster. It can't be, Nathaniel whispered, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. But the evidence was undeniable. His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted for over 20 years, was systematically draining their fortune. A soft knock on the door startled him. Sarah, his devoted assistant, stepped in, her face etched with concern. "Mr. Lancaster, you've been here all night. Is everything okay?" Nathaniel looked up, his eyes bloodshot and shadowed with disbelief. "Sarah? I need you to do something for me. It's sensitive." Sarah nodded, her professionalism shielding her growing concern. "Of course, sir. Anything. I need you to hire a private investigator, the best in San Francisco. Tell them I want every move Evelyn makes documented, every meeting, every place she visits." His voice lowered to a whisper. "And Sarah, this stays between us. No one can know." Without another word, Sarah turned to carry out his orders. Nathaniel returned to his screen, his mind a whirl with questions. How long had this been going on? And more importantly, why? They had built a life together, shared goals, dreams, ambitions. What could have driven Evelyn to betray him so completely? In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel lived a double life. To the world, he remained the composed visionary CEO, striking deals, expanding his empire. But behind closed doors, he was a man consumed by suspicion and pain, buried in surveillance photos and investigator reports. The final blow came on a crisp autumn evening. Nathaniel sat in an unmarked car across the street from the Four Seasons in downtown San Francisco, his heart pounding as he watched the entrance. At precisely 8:15 p.m., a sleek black Audi pulled up. Evelyn stepped out, stunning in a red cocktail dress. But she wasn't alone. A man Nathaniel didn't recognize emerged from the driver's side, tall, dark-haired, and considerably younger. He placed his hand on the small of Evelyn's back as they entered the hotel. The casual intimacy of the gesture told Nathaniel everything he needed to know. For a long moment, Nathaniel sat frozen, the weight of Evelyn's betrayal crashing down on him. Then, with trembling hands, he reached for his phone and dialed a number burned into his memory. "Jack, it's Nathaniel Lancaster. I need everything you can find on the man with my wife. Name, background, financials, everything." As he hung up, a wave of nausea surged through him. Nathaniel barely stumbled out of the car before vomiting onto the sidewalk. Pedestrians gave him a wide berth, none recognizing the billionaire in the disheveled man doubled over in the street. When he finally straightened up, wiping his mouth with a monogrammed handkerchief, Nathaniel felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Utter, soul-crushing defeat. The woman he had built a life with, trusted with every part of himself, wasn't just cheating on him, she was helping to dismantle the empire they had built together. The days that followed blurred into a haze of fury, heartbreak, and disbelief. Nathaniel threw himself into his work with a ferocity that unsettled his staff. He was the first to arrive, the last to leave, often never leaving at all. It was as if, through sheer effort, he could undo the damage, force the world back into place. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It began with a nagging cough, one he brushed off as stress or fatigue. But then came the chest pain, the breathlessness. Sarah, alarmed, demanded he see a doctor. The diagnosis hit like a freight train. Stage 4 lung cancer. It had already metastasized to his liver. 6 months, maybe a year, with aggressive treatment. As Nathaniel sat in the sterile hospital room, Listening to the oncologist list treatment options, a strange calm settled over him. The sting of Evelyn's betrayal, the fear of losing everything, even the devastation of his diagnosis, it all faded into the background. What remained was a single, burning purpose. He would not go quietly. If these were his final months, he would make them count. Evelyn and her lover believed they had won, that they could steal everything he had worked for. They were wrong. That night, alone in his office, Nathaniel began to plan. He called in old favors, made deals with former enemies. He restructured his company, created new shell corporations, and moved assets with such speed and precision that his financial team could barely keep up. To the outside world, it looked as though Nathaniel Lancaster was consolidating his empire, perhaps preparing for a major acquisition. But in reality, he was setting the stage for a revenge so total, so destructive, it would be whispered about in San Francisco's business circles for years. Each move was calculated like a master chess player, anticipating his opponent's next 5 steps before they even touched a piece. As the weeks passed, Nathaniel allowed Evelyn to believe her betrayal remained undiscovered. He played the part of the distracted, crumbling husband flawlessly, even as he watched her every move. He learned everything there was to know about Landon Royce, the man who had seduced his wife and plotted to steal his fortune. Landon, Nathaniel discovered, was a career con artist, leaving behind a trail of wealthy victims and shattered lives. Evelyn was merely his latest mark. A sickness far worse than cancer twisted in his gut as he read through dossiers, surveillance files, and witness statements. Every fact confirmed what he most dreaded. She hadn't just made a mistake, she had chosen him. Willingly. This knowledge brought Nathaniel no comfort, but it did steel his resolve. He wouldn't just protect what was his. He would make sure Landon Royce never conned another soul again. As for Evelyn, Nathaniel's feelings were more tangled. The love he had felt for her over 2 decades warred bitterly with his fury and heartbreak. Nights blurred into each other as he stared at their wedding photo on his desk, asking himself over and over, when had she stopped loving him? Or had she ever? But in the end, the choice was clear. She, too, would face the consequences. She had thrown away a life built on trust and loyalty for the empty promises of a fraud. She would learn the cost of that decision. Nathaniel's plan was intricate, an elegant tapestry of legal strategy and financial precision. He designed a maze of transactions and investment structures so convoluted even his most senior advisors couldn't fully trace them. At the heart of it all was a single, irrevocable trust, its contents and true beneficiaries known only to Nathaniel and his most trusted attorney. It was his final vault. One no thief, no matter how charming or close, could ever penetrate. As he worked, Nathaniel felt his body failing. The cancer treatments left him drained and violently ill. His once formidable presence had grown gaunt, his strength waning by the day. But rage has its own momentum, and betrayal its own bitter fuel. But he pushed through the agony, fueled by a relentless will. He had always been a man who thrived on control. And now, facing the greatest loss of control imaginable, he funneled everything into this final act. It was on a cold, rain-swept night in late November that everything changed. Nathaniel had just returned from another brutal round of chemotherapy and was working late in his office, as had become his routine. Sarah had long since gone home, leaving him alone in the towering, silent building. As he stood to pour himself a glass of water, a wave of dizziness overwhelmed him. Nathaniel reached out to steady himself on the desk, but his legs, weakened from treatment, gave out beneath him. He collapsed. His head struck the sharp corner of the desk on the way down. Darkness closed in. When he regained consciousness, he found himself lying in a pool of his own blood, paralyzed by pain. His head throbbed with a searing agony, and warm wetness spread beneath him. With trembling fingers, he reached for his phone, only to see it lying inches away, just out of reach, having skittered across the floor in his fall. As he lay there, the reality of his situation sinking in, Nathaniel was struck by a moment of perfect clarity. In a flash of stark, vivid detail, he saw the path his life had taken, the decisions, the sacrifices, the love he had lost. He thought of Evelyn, of the years they had shared, and the quiet erosion of trust. He thought of Landon, the man who had stolen not only his wife, but everything they had built together. And he thought of his plan, the elegant, ruthless strategy he had crafted in secret. In that moment, Nathaniel Lancaster made a decision that would alter the course of everything that was to follow. With the last of his strength, he dragged himself across the floor to his desk, lifting himself just enough to reach the keyboard. He typed a series of commands, entering encryption keys and overriding security protocols. As his vision blurred and consciousness faded, he pressed the final enter key. A message flashed across the screen: "Protocol initiated." With a faint, knowing smile, Nathaniel Lancaster closed his eyes. Even in death, he would have the last word. The rules had changed, and now neither Evelyn nor Landon, nor even Nathaniel himself, could predict what would come next. As the first light of dawn crept across the San Francisco skyline, Sarah arrived at the office to find Nathaniel unconscious, barely breathing. The ambulance was called, and by mid-morning, the news had spread across the city's elite circles. Nathaniel Lancaster, tech mogul and one of San Francisco's most powerful figures, had suffered a massive stroke. In the days that followed, as Nathaniel lay in a coma in the ICU, the machinery of his final act began to turn. Across the city, in boardrooms and shadowy corners, on trading floors and in penthouses, the ripples of his last move spread outward. Evelyn rushed to the hospital, wearing a mask of well-practiced concern, unaware that the life she had so carefully constructed was about to collapse. Landon, convinced of his victory, remained oblivious to the trap slowly tightening around him. In the sterile quiet of the hospital, machines beeped rhythmically, keeping Nathaniel alive. But his mind, always his most powerful asset, had already launched its final and most devastating play. The stage was set for a reckoning that would shake the foundations of San Francisco's elite. In his hospital room, surrounded by blinking monitors and efficient nurses, Nathaniel Lancaster lay still. To all outward appearances, he was a man defeated, crushed by illness and betrayal. But beneath the surface, in the labyrinthine world of finance and law, his last and greatest plan was just beginning to unfold. In the weeks ahead, fortunes would be won and lost, reputations destroyed, lives forever changed. And at the center of it all, silent and seemingly helpless, lay the man who had orchestrated everything. Nathaniel Lancaster, master strategist to the very end. As news of his condition rippled through the city, the world watched, wondering what would become of the Lancaster empire. But the real drama was just beginning, hidden in the shadows of boardrooms and bedrooms, buried in secret accounts and hushed conversations. The game had entered its final, most dangerous phase. And as the players unknowingly assumed their positions, the clock ticked toward an ending none of them could foresee. In the stillness of his hospital room, hooked to wires and machines, Nathaniel Lancaster waited. His body might have failed, but his will remained unbroken. He had set the board, moved the pieces, and now, even from the brink of death, he would play the endgame. He would see his final game played out, down to its bitter, inevitable end. The stage was set, the players unaware of the parts they were playing in this grand, tragic production. As San Francisco bustled through its morning routines, the city remained oblivious to the drama quietly unfolding in its midst. The first domino in Nathaniel Lancaster's intricate plan had tipped, the endgame had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The rhythmic beeping of medical monitors filled the private hospital room where Nathaniel Lancaster lay still. His once commanding presence had withered into a frail, diminished form. The sterile white walls and sharp scent of antiseptic stood in stark contrast to the storm quietly raging in the comatose man's mind. Dr. Emily Chen, Nathaniel's lead physician, stood at the foot of his bed, reviewing his most recent test results, her brow furrowed in concern. She turned to Sarah, who had barely left Nathaniel's side since the day he was admitted. "His vitals are stable," Dr. Chen said softly, "but there's been no meaningful improvement in brain activity." Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on Nathaniel's face. "He's a fighter, Dr. Chen. If anyone can beat this, it's him." After the doctor left, Sarah leaned in close, her voice a whisper in his ear. "I don't know if you can hear me, Mr. Lancaster, but I'm following your instructions. Everything is moving forward, just like you planned." Deep within the labyrinth of his unconscious mind, Nathaniel's thoughts churned, a whirlwind of memories and strategy. Evelyn's betrayal, the cancer diagnosis, the revenge he had painstakingly set in motion before everything came crashing down. All of it collided in his mind: rage, sorrow, love, and the cold precision of his final act. In his mind's eye, Nathaniel saw himself once again atop his empire, surveying all that he had built. But the image cracked, then collapsed, revealing the truth of his current existence. Trapped in a broken body, locked in a race against time to see his plan through. Across the city, inside the opulent Lancaster penthouse, Evelyn paced anxiously, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. "Landon, we need to move faster," she said, her voice tense. "Nathaniel's condition, it's opened doors we didn't expect. We need to act before anyone starts asking questions." Landon's voice came through the line smooth as ever, but with an edge of caution. "Patience, baby. We can't afford any missteps. One wrong move, and we lose everything." Evelyn's frustration boiled over. "We're talking about billions, Landon. With Nathaniel out of the way, we could have it all. Don't you see? This is our moment." She ended the call and caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was a far cry from the demure, polished wife she had been for so many years. Her eyes now carried a different glint, one of cold determination and something dangerously close to desperation. She thought back to the day she first met Landon, how he had awakened something inside her that she thought had long since died. The thrill of their secret meetings, the rush of adrenaline as they plotted to take Nathaniel's fortune. It had all been intoxicating. But now, with Nathaniel lying comatose and their plans inching toward fruition, Evelyn felt a new emotion rising within her: impatience. Across town, in his sleek downtown apartment, Landon Royce sat at his computer, a glass of aged scotch at his elbow. His chiseled face was bathed in the pale glow of the screen as he combed through financial records and offshore statements. To the outside world, Landon appeared to be the embodiment of modern success: young, affluent, magnetic. But beneath the charm and designer suits was a man driven by something far darker: an unquenchable hunger. For more. More wealth, more power, more victories. Evelyn Lancaster had been his most ambitious target yet, and by far his greatest conquest. She was elegant, intelligent, and above all, she held the keys to a fortune beyond even his grandest aspirations. He had played his part flawlessly: her confidant, her lover, her co-conspirator. But as he examined the intricate maze of shell accounts and coded transfers they had built together, a flicker of unease passed through him. Something wasn't right. The Lancaster fortune was vast, but a number of key assets seemed to be missing. Gone. Landon's thoughts raced. Had Nathaniel suspected something all along? Had he hidden portions of his wealth in places even Evelyn couldn't reach? Or was there another layer, one Landon hadn't yet considered? He reached for his phone but paused. Evelyn was becoming increasingly unpredictable. Her impatience was dangerous. It could jeopardize everything. No, he would keep his doubts to himself, for now. Because in Landon's world, information was leverage. And Landon Royce never gave up an advantage. Back at the hospital, Sarah sat beside Nathaniel's bed, speaking in hushed tones with Jack Wren, the investigator Nathaniel had brought in before his collapse. "Mr. Lancaster's instructions were clear," Sarah said softly. "We're to proceed as though he's still managing the company. All executive decisions must follow the contingency protocols he put in place." Jack nodded, his rugged face etched with concern. "And the other matter? Surveillance on Mrs. Lancaster and her companion?" Sarah's eyes narrowed. "We continue as planned. Mr. Lancaster wanted full documentation, every conversation, every move. He was very specific." As they spoke, neither of them noticed the faint flutter of Nathaniel's eyelids, the subtle twitch of his right hand. Deep in the depths of his mind, Nathaniel battled the darkness threatening to pull him under. He had come too far, given too much, to stop now. In his mind's eye, he saw the chessboard, his masterpiece. Every move, every piece, patiently waiting for checkmate. Evelyn and Landon thought they were in control, but they were merely pawns in a game whose true scope they could never begin to fathom. Days melted into weeks, and yet the Lancaster empire ran on, seamlessly. Guided by the protocols Nathaniel had put in place, the company appeared, at least to the outside world, to be weathering its CEO's absence remarkably well. Stock prices remained steady. Major initiatives continued on track. There was no visible indication of the storm quietly brewing beneath the surface. Evelyn, growing more confident by the day, began to insert herself more directly into the company's affairs. She attended board meetings, made high-profile appearances, and gave press interviews, painting herself as the devoted wife stepping up in her husband's time of need. But behind closed doors, her actions told another story. Late-night meetings with lawyers and private wealth managers, secretive phone calls with Landon, an ever-growing stack of internal documents cataloging the Lancaster assets. All signs pointed to a woman preparing to seize control. What Evelyn didn't realize was that every move she made was being closely watched and meticulously recorded. The loyal team members Nathaniel had discreetly placed in key positions fed daily updates to Sarah. Every authorization, every inquiry, every attempt to access sensitive financial data. Meanwhile, Landon was grappling with something entirely new: doubt. The deeper he examined the Lancaster accounts, the more unsettled he became. Some numbers didn't align. Certain investments seemed like dead ends. Entire sums of money had seemingly vanished into nowhere. One night, unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, Landon showed up at the penthouse unannounced, a folder of documents under his arm. "We need to talk," he said bluntly as Evelyn opened the door. "Something's off with the numbers. I think Nathaniel might have outsmarted us." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, flashing with frustration. "Don't be absurd. Nathaniel's in a coma. He's not a threat anymore." But as Landon walked her through the irregularities he'd found, a flicker of doubt crossed Evelyn's face. Had she underestimated her husband? Could it be that, even now, silent and immobile in a hospital bed, Nathaniel Lancaster was still 10 steps ahead? They argued into the night, their voices rising with tension. Neither of them noticed the tiny, sophisticated listening device hidden in a floral arrangement on the credenza, a silent witness to the unraveling of their alliance. Miles away, in a plain, windowless office, Jack Wren listened in with grim satisfaction. He reached for his secure line and dialed. "They're starting to crack," he said simply. Sarah's voice was cool, resolute. "Then proceed to the next phase." Mr. Lancaster was very clear about what comes next. As she hung up, Sarah looked down at the still figure in the hospital bed. "It's working, sir," she whispered. "Everything is falling into place, just like you planned." In the depths of his coma, Nathaniel Lancaster felt a surge of triumph. The pieces were moving. The trap was closing. Soon, very soon, Evelyn and Landon would learn the true cost of their betrayal. But even as his plan advanced, Nathaniel was fighting a different kind of war, a battle for his life. The cancer, which had been ravaging his body even before the stroke, continued its unrelenting march. Dr. Chen and her team pushed forward with experimental therapies and aggressive treatments, but the prognosis remained grim. Inside his mind, Nathaniel worked tirelessly, reviewing every aspect of his plan, searching for any flaw, any misstep that could compromise his revenge. He had poured everything into this: his strength, his peace, perhaps even his life. Failure was not an option. As weeks stretched into months, tension in San Francisco's business elite reached a boiling point. Rumors swirled about the true state of Nathaniel Lancaster's health, about internal power struggles within his empire, and about the looming threat of a hostile takeover. Evelyn found herself under siege from every direction. Board members challenged her authority. Once loyal allies grew cold. Reporters followed her relentlessly, desperate for any scent of scandal. The cracks in her polished exterior began to show. After one particularly brutal board meeting, Evelyn retreated to her office, her hands trembling as she poured herself a large glass of wine. She lifted it to her lips, then paused, her gaze catching a framed photo on her desk. It was a picture of her and Nathaniel on their wedding day, young, beaming, hopeful. For a brief moment, Evelyn felt something unexpected. Regret, guilt. But she quickly buried it. She had come too far to waver now. Nathaniel had ignored her, prioritized his ambitions and his empire over their marriage. She deserved more. Deserved the life she was clawing her way toward. Still, as she stared at the photo, a chilling thought crept in. What if Nathaniel woke up? What if, against all odds, he recovered? The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Across the city, Landon was unraveling in his own way. His once effortless charm had deserted him, replaced by a relentless, gnawing paranoia. Every sideways glance, every private conversation that ended when he entered a room. It all seemed suspicious. He who had always prided himself on being one step ahead now felt like a man stumbling through shadows, uncertain, unbalanced. The Lancaster fortune, once so tantalizingly close, now felt like a mirage, fading with every step. In a rare moment of weakness, Landon considered walking away. He had siphoned enough to start fresh, somewhere far from San Francisco, somewhere the lies couldn't follow him. But the idea of surrender, of watching Evelyn and all that wealth slip through his fingers, was unbearable. No, he would see this through, whatever the cost. As Evelyn and Landon wrestled with their own spiraling doubts and growing fears, Nathaniel Lancaster's plan continued to unfold, executed with flawless precision. Key assets were quietly shifted. Loyal personnel were strategically positioned in essential roles. Damning evidence, painstakingly gathered, was secured, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. Sarah, working tirelessly behind the scenes, orchestrated it all with a precision and intensity that would have made Nathaniel proud. She was his most trusted lieutenant, the one person who knew the full extent of his master plan, and she was determined to see it through, to honor the faith he had placed in her. But not even Sarah could have predicted what came next. On a cold, rainy night in February, as she sat by Nathaniel's bedside reading him the latest company reports, something extraordinary happened. His eyes, still for months, suddenly fluttered open. His lips moved, the words barely a whisper. Sarah leaned in, heart pounding. "Sarah," Nathaniel rasped, his voice dry and cracked from disuse. "Is it done?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she gripped his hand. "Not yet, Mr. Lancaster, but soon. Everything is moving forward, just as you planned." A faint smile curved Nathaniel's lips. Then his eyes closed again. But this time something had changed. The monitors tracking his brain activity flickered to life, registering patterns absent for months. Dr. Chen, called urgently to the room, could hardly believe what she was seeing. "It's remarkable," she said, scanning the data. "Mr. Lancaster appears to be emerging from the coma. I can't explain it, but he's fighting back." News of Nathaniel's condition spread like wildfire. Across the Lancaster empire, it sent shockwaves. Board members who had begun to waver suddenly rallied. Employees on the verge of jumping ship recommitted to their roles. And in the high-rises, penthouses, and elite circles of San Francisco, the city's power brokers began re-evaluating their loyalties. For Evelyn and Landon, the news was devastating. Months of careful plotting, deception, and manipulation now threatened to unravel in a matter of days. They met in a secluded hotel room, both visibly shaken. "We need to act now," Evelyn snapped, pacing the room like a panicked animal. "If Nathaniel wakes up, if he talks to the board or the lawyers, we're finished." Landon slumped in an armchair, dragging his hands through his hair in frustration. "It's too risky. We don't even have full access to the accounts yet. If we move now, we could lose everything." Their argument escalated, anger, desperation, and blame pouring out like venom. By the time they parted in the early hours of the morning, the united front they once presented had crumbled, replaced by suspicion and smoldering resentment. What neither of them realized was that their entire conversation had been recorded, every word, every gesture, captured by the high-grade surveillance equipment Jack Wren had installed weeks earlier. As dawn broke over San Francisco, casting golden light across the steel and glass skyline, the stage was set for the final act of Nathaniel Lancaster's master plan. The city blinked awake, unaware it was standing at the edge of a meticulously orchestrated reckoning. In his hospital room, surrounded by Dr. Chen and a dedicated medical team, Nathaniel continued his slow, determined climb back toward consciousness. Sarah, exhausted but energized, made a series of phone calls, locking the final pieces of the intricate puzzle into place. Board members were summoned for an emergency meeting. Attorneys were placed on standby. And deep beneath the Lancaster Tower, inside a secure vault, a sealed set of documents, untouched for months, was finally brought to light. These weren't just papers. They were weapons. Ammunition for a war Nathaniel had no intention of losing. To the outside world, it appeared a miracle was unfolding. The triumphant return of a fallen titan. Headlines celebrated the Lancaster miracle. News crews clustered outside the hospital, waiting breathlessly for updates. But beneath the surface, a much darker narrative was preparing to unfold. The trap Nathaniel had so meticulously engineered was about to snap shut. And when it did, it wouldn't just catch, it would crush. And its prey, Evelyn and Landon, had no idea just how thoroughly they had been outplayed. As the city held its collective breath, Nathaniel Lancaster lay still, eyes closed, his mind honed like a blade. Every hardship, the betrayal, the cancer, the long, dark silence had led to this moment. He had been broken, but never beaten, and now vengeance hummed just beneath his skin like static before a storm. And as strength slowly returned to his limbs, a faint, secretive smile ghosted across his lips. The game was nearly finished, and Nathaniel Lancaster fully intended to rise as its unquestioned victor. Evelyn and Landon had played their roles perfectly, but they had never been the authors of this story. They were merely actors in a drama of Nathaniel's design. Puppets in a theater they never realized had an audience. Now, as the final curtain prepared to rise, they would come to understand the true cost of underestimating him. In the days to come, San Francisco would bear witness to a reckoning the likes of which it had never seen. Fortunes would be won and lost, reputations shattered, lives forever transformed. And at the epicenter of it all would be Nathaniel Lancaster, the maestro of a symphony of revenge, conducted from a hospital bed. A man who had already written the ending long before anyone else knew the story had begun. The city slept, blind to the tremors preparing to rip through its foundations. But in boardrooms and bedrooms, law offices and luxury penthouses, the key players braced themselves. The endgame had begun, and as sunlight spilled across the bay and the winds of change swept the streets, the Lancaster Empire stood on the precipice of its most defining trial. The world watched, waiting to see who would emerge from the storm. Then came the bells. The somber toll of church bells echoed through San Francisco's Pacific Heights. Their heavy song carried on the crisp autumn wind. A sea of mourners, cloaked in black, ascended the steps of Grace Cathedral, faces awash in grief, shock, and for some, veiled calculation. Nathaniel Lancaster, titan of technology, architect of a corporate dynasty, and one of San Francisco's most formidable figures, was dead. The news sent shockwaves through the city's business elite. After months in a coma, Nathaniel Lancaster had shown signs of awakening, renewing hope, igniting speculation. But in a cruel twist of fate, just as it seemed he might rise and reclaim his empire, his weakened body finally gave in to the ravages of cancer. Inside Grace Cathedral, beneath vaulted Gothic arches and cascading light from stained glass windows, San Francisco's elite gathered to pay their respects. In the front pew, Evelyn Lancaster sat motionless, her face hidden beneath a black lace veil. To all appearances, she was the image of a grieving widow. But behind the veil, her eyes moved restlessly, searching the crowd for one face. Landon Royce slipped quietly into the cathedral just as the service began, choosing a seat near the back. His handsome features were carefully composed in solemn reverence, but his gaze never left Evelyn's shrouded figure. As the priest spoke of Nathaniel's business genius, his philanthropic legacy, and the indelible mark he had left on the city, a thick, silent tension began to gather in the air. This was more than a memorial. It was the closing act of an era. Everyone in attendance knew the real drama was yet to come. The reading of Nathaniel Lancaster's will, scheduled for the next day, loomed large in every whispered conversation. Billions were at stake. The future of one of the most formidable business empires on the West Coast would soon be decided. As the funeral procession moved toward the cemetery, discreet conversations flickered through the air like sparks. Glances exchanged, silent deals struck. Alliances shifted with each passing moment as San Francisco's power players recalibrated in real time, adjusting to a post-Lancaster landscape. Evelyn remained apart from it all, flawlessly portraying the grieving widow. But as the first shovelful of earth landed on Nathaniel's casket, something stirred in her chest. Was it remorse, fear, guilt, or just a pang of unease about what was still to come? She smothered the feeling. There was no room for doubt now. Everything she had sacrificed, everything she had fought for, hinged on the next 24 hours. She couldn't afford to falter. As the mourners slowly dispersed, Evelyn found herself face to face with Sarah, Nathaniel's ever-loyal assistant. For a brief moment, neither woman spoke. The weight of unspoken history hung heavy between them. "Mrs. Lancaster," Sarah said at last, her voice crisp, professional. "The reading of the will is scheduled for 2 p.m. tomorrow at Lancaster Tower. Mr. Goldstein asked me to confirm your attendance." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I'll be there, of course. Thank you, Sarah." As Sarah turned to walk away, Evelyn's voice stopped her. "Sarah, how was he? At the end?" Sarah paused, her back still to Evelyn. When she spoke, her voice was soft, barely more than a breath. He was at peace, Mrs. Lancaster. He said he had accomplished everything he set out to do. With that cryptic statement hanging in the air, Sarah turned and walked away, leaving Evelyn with a growing sense of dread. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of anxious anticipation. Across San Francisco, in lavish penthouses and mahogany-paneled boardrooms, strategies were plotted and discarded. Legal teams pored over documents, desperate for leverage. And in a modest, windowless office downtown, Jack Wren, the private investigator Nathaniel had hired months earlier, prepared to deliver the final piece of a puzzle years in the making. As the appointed hour neared, the top-floor conference room in Lancaster Tower began to fill. Board members, executives, and key stakeholders took their seats around the massive oval table. The air was thick with tension, every breath heavy with expectation. Evelyn arrived last, flanked by her personal attorney. She took her seat at the head of the table, her posture immaculate, her expression unreadable. But inside, she was a storm barely held in check. Her nails pressed crescent moons into the leather armrest beneath the table. She scanned the room, searching for signs, any sign, that someone knew what was coming. But those who had worked beside her long enough noticed the subtle signs. The slight tremor in her hands, the tightness around her mouth. Beneath the mask of control, anxiety simmered. Jerome Goldstein, Nathaniel's longtime attorney and the executor of his estate, called the meeting to order. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began solemnly, "we are gathered today to hear the last will and testament of Nathaniel Lancaster." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Before we begin, I must inform you that Mr. Lancaster made a number of unconventional requests regarding this proceeding." A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, heart pounding in her chest. Goldstein continued, "As instructed, this reading will occur in two parts. First, we will address the distribution of Mr. Lancaster's personal assets and the future of Lancaster Corporation. Following a short recess, we will reconvene to view a video message, one Mr. Lancaster insisted be played for everyone present." The room buzzed. A video? It was unprecedented. But then again, Nathaniel Lancaster had always had a flair for drama. Goldstein cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Nathaniel Lancaster, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my estate as follows." What followed was a masterclass in strategy and foresight. In his final months, Nathaniel had completely restructured his holdings, creating a labyrinth of trusts, charitable foundations, and corporate entities. Lancaster Corporation would be divided, with substantial shares going to longtime employees, community initiatives, and philanthropic efforts. Every name read that wasn't hers felt like another inch slipping beneath the surface. Her breathing quickened, shallow and tight. Her attorney shifted beside her but said nothing. As Goldstein read on, Evelyn's composure began to falter. Her name had not yet been mentioned. Where was the control she had been promised? Where was the legacy she had schemed so long to secure? Finally, Goldstein reached the portion addressing Nathaniel's personal assets. "To my wife, Evelyn Lancaster, I leave the sum of $1 million, to be paid in monthly installments over the next 10 years. Silence fell. $1 million, a fortune to most. But to Evelyn, who had lived a life steeped in wealth and excess, it was a slap in the face. And the monthly installments? It was as if Nathaniel was still controlling her from beyond the grave, reminding her of her dependence. A low, hot rage flared beneath her ribs. It was humiliation disguised as benevolence. He had taken everything and left her with a leash. Her stomach turned. Her head swam. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some mistake. Evelyn opened her mouth to object, but Goldstein was already speaking again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a brief recess. Please return in 15 minutes for the viewing of Mr. Lancaster's video message." As the room emptied, Evelyn remained seated, frozen in place. Her attorney leaned in, whispering urgently about contesting the will, about legal challenges and appeals, but his words barely registered. She was too deep in shock to absorb anything. She didn't even notice Landon until he was standing directly in front of her. "Evie," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to talk. Now." She looked up, startled by the panic in his eyes. Without a word, she rose and followed him to a small private office just off the conference room. As soon as the door closed behind them, Landon spun to face her, his composure slipping. What the hell happened in there? Where's the money? Where's the company? Evelyn shook her head, still in a daze. I don't know. I don't understand. This isn't what we agreed on. This isn't what Nathaniel promised me. Landon ran his hands through his hair, his slick confidence unraveling. You told me everything was under control. You said Nathaniel wouldn't suspect anything. Damn it, Evelyn, I've burned through everything setting up our exit. If we don't get that money. His voice faltered, the weight of what he wasn't saying pressing down on them both. Evelyn stared at him, really looked at him, for the first time. The charm, the promises, the illusion of passion and adventure, stripped away to reveal the truth. Landon Royce was nothing more than a con artist, and she had fallen for his greatest con. Before she could respond, a knock on the door made them both jump. Sarah's voice came through, composed and professional. Mrs. Lancaster, Mr. Royce, the video presentation is about to begin. They returned to the conference room and sat far apart. The lights dimmed. A large screen descended from the ceiling. For a moment, there was only static, and then Nathaniel Lancaster's face appeared. He looked frail, the illness evident in the hollowness of his cheeks, but his eyes still burned with the same fierce determination that had built an empire. If you're watching this, Nathaniel began, his voice surprisingly strong, then I am gone. But don't mourn for me. A hush settled over the room. What you are about to witness, he continued, is the culmination of my life's work, my final and greatest achievement. He paused, a faint, knowing smile on his lips. I'm sure by now you're all wondering about the will that was just read. I apologize for the deception, but it was necessary. You see, the real distribution of my assets, the true future of Lancaster Corporation, is about to be revealed. Evelyn felt her heart skip a beat. For a fleeting moment, a spark of hope flared. Had Nathaniel been bluffing? Some kind of game. That's what it felt like. Evelyn's inheritance, her rightful seat at the head of Lancaster Corporation, was surely moments away from being confirmed. But as Nathaniel continued to speak, that hope was swiftly extinguished. For the past year, he said, his tone sharpening, I've been aware of a plot against me. A conspiracy to steal my fortune, to dismantle everything I spent a lifetime building. The architects of this scheme thought they were clever, thought they had fooled me. He leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing. But they underestimated me, as so many have before. Nathaniel's piercing gaze locked with the camera, and by extension, with everyone seated around the room. Evelyn, my dear wife, did you truly believe I wouldn't notice the missing funds? The hidden accounts? Your affair with Mr. Royce? The color drained from Evelyn's face. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Heads turned. She sat frozen, rooted to the spot, trapped beneath Nathaniel's damning stare. And you, Landon Royce. Nathaniel's voice seethed with contempt. You're not the first man who's tried to worm his way into my empire, and you likely won't be the last. But you are, perhaps, the most arrogant and the most foolish. At the back of the room, Landon sat pale and stiff, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. What you're about to see, Nathaniel continued, is the result of months of careful investigation. Mr. Goldstein, if you would distribute the files. Jerome Goldstein stood and moved methodically around the table, placing thick manila envelopes in front of each person. In these files, Nathaniel explained, you will find irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy against me. Bank statements, surveillance photos, recorded conversations. Everything needed to prove guilt, without question. The room erupted into motion. Papers rustled, documents were examined, eyes widened in disbelief. Nathaniel's voice rose again, silencing the chaos. But this isn't only about punishment. This is about justice, about safeguarding what I've built. He outlined a restructuring of Lancaster Corporation, one that would transfer power into the hands of a small, loyal group of longtime employees and trusted advisors. The Lancaster Foundation, a philanthropic arm Nathaniel had founded years earlier, would now hold the majority stake. Its mandate expanded to include oversight of the company's ethical governance. And as for the personal fortune Evelyn and her accomplice sought so desperately, Nathaniel said, a flicker of satisfaction in his tone, it will be used to establish a fund for victims of financial fraud. A fitting legacy, don't you think? As the full extent of Nathaniel's vengeance became clear, Evelyn felt her world collapse. Every scheme, every lie, every betrayal, all of it. For nothing. No, worse than nothing. She was ruined. Her name disgraced, her future erased. She turned to Landon, seeking a trace of solidarity, some thread of reassurance. But his seat was empty. Revelations. He had vanished, slipping away amidst the chaos, leaving her to face the consequences alone. Nathaniel's voice pulled Evelyn's attention back to the screen. "Evelyn," he said, his tone no longer sharp but somber, almost mournful. "I loved you once. I believed we shared a dream, a vision for something greater. I gave you everything, my trust, my love, my life. And in return, you gave me betrayal." Tears streamed down Evelyn's cheeks as the enormity of what she had done crashed down upon her. "But I am not without mercy," Nathaniel continued. "The $1 million mentioned in the will, that provision stands. It's not the fortune you craved, but it is enough to begin again, a chance for redemption." The screen went dark. Pandemonium erupted. Board members raised their voices, demanding answers. Lawyers gathered in whispered circles. Security guards appeared at the exits, likely under instruction to hold the room until authorities arrived. And in the middle of it all, Evelyn Lancaster sat unmoving. Nathaniel's final words echoed in her mind. A chance at redemption. But how could she ever redeem herself? How could she possibly rebuild from this? The game she thought she had been playing, the manipulation of a distracted husband, the thrilling affair with a younger man, the chase for unimaginable wealth, had been a facade. The real game had unfolded far beyond her comprehension. Orchestrated from a hospital bed, Nathaniel Lancaster's final move was nothing short of genius. He had protected his empire, exposed the traitors, and restructured the company into something more powerful, more meaningful than ever before. Lancaster Corporation would now become a beacon for ethical business, a force for good in the world. And Evelyn? She was left with nothing but the crushing realization that she had traded away true love, loyalty, and purpose for a fantasy, one that disintegrated into dust in her hands. As the authorities arrived and began unraveling the web Nathaniel had so carefully woven, the room fell into a stunned, reverent silence. Across San Francisco, in boardrooms, media outlets, and private circles, the story of Nathaniel Lancaster's final masterstroke began to spread. It would become legend, a tale of betrayal, of justice, of redemption. And somewhere in the city, as the sun set on the day that saw Evelyn Lancaster's downfall and the rebirth of her husband's legacy, Landon Royce boarded a plane, a small duffel bag his only companion. He had lost everything in his pursuit of wealth and influence, but he had escaped with one thing: his freedom. For now. As night descended upon San Francisco, the lights of Lancaster Tower gleamed, bright and unwavering, a symbol of power redefined. But inside, a new era was beginning, one that would not only reshape a single empire but redefine what it meant to lead with purpose in a modern world. Nathaniel Lancaster was gone, but his presence lingered. His legacy, crafted with precision, pain, and brilliance, would endure not just as that of a business titan, but as a visionary who had transformed personal loss into lasting good. And in a modest, quiet apartment across town, Evelyn Lancaster sat alone, the weight of her choices pressing down with relentless force, facing a future she had never imagined, and the long, uncertain road to redemption that lay ahead. Across the city, the San Francisco Chronicle splashed its front-page headline in bold block letters: Lancaster's last move, a legacy reborn. Lancaster's last stand, betrayal, revenge, and redemption. In the days following the explosive ruse of reading of the will, the story of Nathaniel Lancaster's final masterstroke dominated every conversation, from high-rise boardrooms to downtown coffee shops. Evelyn Lancaster, once the darling of San Francisco's elite, now found herself at the epicenter of a media firestorm. Paparazzi swarmed outside her penthouse, desperate for a glimpse of the fallen socialite. Former friends vanished, their calls and invitations evaporating overnight. The same socialites who had once fawned over her at charity galas and exclusive launches now whispered behind her back, reveling in the schadenfreude of her downfall. As she sat in her opulent Pacific Heights penthouse, surrounded by the echoes of a life quickly slipping through her fingers, Evelyn felt the walls close in. The first payment from Nathaniel's will wouldn't arrive for another 30 days. Her access to the Lancaster fortune had been cut off completely. For the first time in decades, she faced the reality of financial uncertainty. Her phone buzzed constantly, reporters fishing for quotes, lawyers offering to sue the estate, and a handful of former acquaintances calling more out of curiosity than concern. She ignored them all, adrift in disbelief and rising panic. It was Sarah, of all people, who finally broke through the fog. The assistant arrived at the penthouse unannounced, stack of documents in hand, her tone resolute. "Mrs. Lancaster," Sarah said, voice as crisp and professional as ever, "we need to discuss your immediate future. The board has requested you vacate the premises within the week. They've arranged a modest apartment in No Valley. Rent and utilities will be deducted from your monthly stipend." Evelyn blinked at her, stunned. "Vacate? But this is my home. Nathaniel and I bought this place together." Sarah's expression softened, a flicker of pity behind her composed mask. "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Lancaster. The penthouse has always been owned by the corporation. You're welcome to take your personal belongings, of course, but everything else must remain." The weight of it all crashed down like a tidal wave. Evelyn barely made it to the bathroom, heaving into the marble sink. When she emerged, pale, trembling, Sarah was still there, waiting with the same calm resolve. "Why are you doing this?" Evelyn asked, her voice raw. "After everything I've done, why help me?" Sarah looked her in the eye. "Because it's what Mr. Lancaster would have wanted. Despite everything, he believed in second chances." "This is yours, Mrs. Lancaster. I suggest you take it." Evelyn went through the motions of packing up her life, feeling like a stranger in what had once been her sanctuary. Each designer dress, each piece of fine jewelry mocked her now, symbols of a life built on ambition, deception, and misplaced priorities. As she sorted through the last of her belongings, she stumbled upon a photo album she hadn't opened in years. Inside were snapshots from the early days of her life with Nathaniel. Candid moments, laughing together on vacation, clinking glasses over quiet dinners, gazing at each other with a shared, unmistakable glow. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks as she remembered the woman she once was. Full of hope, full of real affection for the brilliant, driven man who had once swept her off her feet. When had that changed? When had the thrill of building something together been replaced by the shallow pursuit of more? More status, more extravagance, more thrill. She couldn't pinpoint the moment, but somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. The day of the move arrived under gray, drizzly skies, a perfect reflection of her mood. A small moving van waited outside, ready to haul the few personal belongings she'd been allowed to take. As she took one last look around the penthouse, Evelyn felt a bittersweet pang, a strange mix of grief and relief. This had been her gilded cage, and though the unknown loomed, some part of her welcomed the opportunity to begin again. Her new apartment in No Valley was a world apart from the luxury she had once taken for granted. Modest rooms, bare-bones furniture, a view of an alleyway instead of the sweeping skyline she once commanded. But as Evelyn unpacked her few boxes, she felt something stir, something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. That glimmer faded quickly. Her first trip to the grocery store was a lesson in humility. Standing in the aisle, overwhelmed by prices and planning, she realized she had never budgeted a single meal in her life. Cooking for herself was another challenge. Her first attempt ended in a smoke-filled kitchen and an unrecognizable blackened mess. Sitting on the floor in her tiny kitchen, surrounded by the aftermath, Evelyn broke down. How had it come to this? But over the weeks that followed, she began to adapt. She learned to navigate the bus schedule, to compare prices, to wash her clothes without help, to celebrate the small victories, like a successful dinner or an organized pantry. It was humbling. But with each day she felt something she had never truly known before: independence. A month after the move, her first stipend arrived. A sum that once would have seemed laughable now felt like salvation. She sat at her simple dining table, carefully budgeting every dollar. For the first time, she understood the value of money, not just owned, but earned. As Evelyn settled into her new routine, she reflected on the path that had led her here. The betrayal, the affair, the hunger for more. It all seemed so empty now, so meaningless compared to the quiet, grounded satisfaction she was slowly beginning to find. In those early weeks, Evelyn often thought of Landon. Where had he disappeared to? Did he ever think of her? But as time passed, the haze of regret gave way to clarity. What she had felt for Landon hadn't been love, not really. It had been a desperate grasp for excitement, for passion, for something she believed was missing. A mirage she chased while blind to the desert growing inside her. About 3 months into her new life, Evelyn was walking through No Valley when she spotted a familiar face. David Chen, Nathaniel's former CFO, was sitting on a bench in the small park near her apartment, quietly tossing crumbs to a flock of pigeons. For a moment, she considered turning around, not yet ready to confront any ghosts from her former life. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way David sat, peaceful, unaffected, like someone who had made peace with the past, something she hadn't yet managed. "David?" she called out softly, approaching the bench. He looked up, startled. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Mrs. Lancaster? I didn't expect to see you here." Evelyn gave a rueful smile. "Please, call me Evelyn. I think we're well past formalities." David nodded and gestured to the space beside him. They sat in silence for several moments, watching the birds squabble over crumbs. Finally, David broke the quiet. "I wanted to hate you," he said bluntly. "When everything came out, when we realized what you and Royce were planning, I was furious. We all were. Nathaniel, he wasn't just our boss. He was a mentor, a friend." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I know, and I'm sorry, David. Truly, more than I can say." Her voice trembled under the weight of truths too long buried. Her apology wasn't strategic. It was raw, unfiltered. David turned toward her. His gaze softened. "I can see that, and I think Nathaniel saw it too. That's probably why he left you that chance." They talked for hours. David told her about the changes since Nathaniel's death, how the company was thriving under its new structure, how the Lancaster Foundation's transparency and ethical leadership had earned it praise from all sectors. Evelyn listened, a quiet awe blooming in her chest. It felt like hearing someone describe a world she had once been part of, but never truly understood. As the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, David stood. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "there's a position opening up at the foundation. Entry level, nothing glamorous, but—" He paused. "If you're interested, I could put in a word." Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. "Why would you do that, after everything?" David shrugged. "Because I believe in second chances too, and because I think working to help others might be exactly what you need." He didn't wait for a reply, just gave her a small nod, a gesture not of pity, but of quiet faith, and walked away. As he walked away, Evelyn remained seated, staring after him, the weight of the moment settling over her. The idea of returning, even in a humble capacity, to the world Nathaniel had built was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Could she do it? Did she even deserve the chance? In the following weeks, Evelyn wrestled with the decision. She began volunteering at a neighborhood community center, helping with fundraising events. To her surprise, she found herself deeply moved by the work. For the first time in years, she felt her energy channeled into something meaningful, something outside herself. It didn't erase her past, but it quieted it, gave it context. Using her skills and her remaining connections to benefit others filled a quiet part of her she hadn't known was still empty. It was during one of these community sessions that Evelyn had a chance encounter. One that would change everything. She was helping serve lunch at a homeless shelter when she noticed a man near the end of the line. His face obscured by a scraggly beard and a worn baseball cap. Something about him was familiar. There was a subtle, unmistakable quality in the way he walked. As he stepped forward to accept his tray, their eyes met, and Evelyn's heart stopped. It was Landon, the man she once thought she loved, the partner in her failed scheme. He stood before her, barely recognizable, a mere shadow of the suave, confident figure who had once swept her into ruin. Gone were the tailored suits and charming grin. In their place, tattered jeans, a stained windbreaker, and a vacant, hollow look in his eyes. They stared at each other in silence, the weight of everything between them pressing down like gravity. Then, without a word, Landon took his meal and disappeared into the crowd. That night, Evelyn lay awake in her small apartment, haunted by his face, by the memory of Nathaniel, by everything she had destroyed and everything she was trying to rebuild. But somewhere in that sleepless haze, she realized something. She'd been given something rare, something fragile, a second chance, and it was hers to lose. The next morning, Evelyn called David Chen. "I'll take the job," she told him, "at the foundation." She knew it would be hard. She knew there would be judgment, cold shoulders, long silences from those she had once called colleagues and friends. But for the first time in a very long time, Evelyn Lancaster felt purpose, determination, a quiet promise to become something better than she had been. That evening, as she prepared for her first day at the foundation, Evelyn pulled out the photo album again. She flipped through the pages, stopping at a picture of her and Nathaniel. Young, vibrant, smiling into a future they had once believed in. "I'll honor you," she whispered. "I'll make this count." She closed the album with a reverent hand, unaware that her story was not quite finished. That across town, in a nondescript office, another chapter was quietly unfolding. Sarah sat across from Jack Wren, the private investigator who had helped bring down Evelyn and Landon's scheme. Between them lay a thick folder, its contents known only to them, and to the late Nathaniel Lancaster. "Are you sure about this?" Jack asked, his voice low, edged with concern. "It could unravel everything we've done." Sarah didn't hesitate. "It's what Mr. Lancaster wanted. He believed redemption had to mean more than just punishment or charity. It had to come from true change." As they began mapping out the final phase of Nathaniel's plan, a puzzle, years in the making, clicked into place. Because Nathaniel Lancaster's game wasn't over. Not yet. Even from beyond the grave, he had one more lesson to teach. Not just to Evelyn, but to everyone who had been touched by his life and by his death. The coming weeks would reveal a truth far more complex than anyone had imagined. And the final reckoning had only just begun. The city of San Francisco would once again be shaken by revelations from the Lancaster Empire. But this time, the story wouldn't be one of scandal or betrayal. This time it would be a story of hope, of genuine transformation, of how forgiveness, when paired with courage, could change lives. As the sun dipped below the Golden Gate, casting the city in a soft amber glow, the stage was quietly being set for the final act of Nathaniel Lancaster's grand design. And at the center of it all, still unknowing, but no longer unwilling, stood Evelyn, a woman standing on the edge of either her greatest triumph or her final reckoning. The choice, as Nathaniel had always believed, would be hers to make. 6 months had passed since Evelyn Lancaster had accepted her position at the Lancaster Foundation. The chill of winter had faded, and San Francisco was beginning to bloom with the gentle arrival of spring. Evelyn stood at the window of her modest office, watching the pedestrians below navigate the lively sidewalks of Noah Valley. Her life now bore little resemblance to the opulent world she had once inhabited. And yet, as she reflected on these past 6 months, she realized that she had found something far more valuable than wealth: peace. Her days were filled with purpose, her nights with quiet. She poured herself into the work, drawing on years of social experience and organizational skills to plan events and fundraisers. The irony wasn't lost on her. How the very tools she once used to chase status were now being used to serve others. It had not been easy. Many of her former peers still looked at her with distrust, or didn't look at her at all. And there were days when the shadow of her past loomed large, when Nathaniel's absence was a silent echo in every boardroom and every quiet moment. But step by step, Evelyn was rebuilding her life, her name, her self-respect. To her own surprise, she had formed a genuine friendship with Sarah. The woman's fierce loyalty to Nathaniel had once made Evelyn feel ashamed, exposed. But in time, that tension had softened into mutual respect, and then into something warmer. As Evelyn turned from the window and sat back at her desk, her gaze fell on 2 framed photos. One was recent, a picture taken at the Foundation's latest gala. She stood among colleagues, her smile unforced, her eyes lit with accomplishment. The other was much older. Her and Nathaniel, their wedding day. She kept it not as a memento of what was lost, but as a reminder of the person she was still striving to become. A knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. Sarah entered, her expression unreadable. "Evelyn," she said, her voice low and serious. "There's something you need to see." She placed a thick manila envelope on the desk. Evelyn froze. She knew that envelope. It was identical to the ones distributed during Nathaniel's will reading. Her hands trembled as she reached for it and opened it. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter in Nathaniel's unmistakable script and a small USB drive. "My dearest Evelyn," the letter began, If you're reading this, then you've taken your first steps on the path to redemption. I always believed there was goodness in you, that the woman I fell in love with was still there, beneath the layers of resentment and misplaced ambition. Tears blurred Evelyn's vision as she continued reading. Nathaniel went on to explain that everything, from the public will reading to the carefully choreographed unraveling of her and Landon's plans, had all been part of something far greater than revenge. I knew simply punishing you would solve nothing, he wrote. You needed to remember who you were, to rediscover the passion for helping others that first drew me to you. So I created this test, the foundation, the job offer, even your run-ins with familiar faces. All of it was designed to give you one thing, a real chance. Not to shame you, but to save you. Evelyn's mind swirled. She looked up at Sarah, who simply gave a small nod. Keep reading, she urged. The letter continued. The USB drive, Nathaniel explained, contained legal documentation absolving Evelyn of any criminal liability. He had used every ounce of his influence to ensure that, regardless of her path forward, she would never be prosecuted. But the true choice, Nathaniel concluded, is still yours. Also on this drive, you'll find documents transferring a significant portion of my personal fortune to you, enough to return to the life you once knew, if that's what you still desire. Or you can use it to expand the Foundation's mission, to help more people, to truly change lives. Not as a penance, but as a purpose. The choice, my dear Evelyn, is entirely yours. And that choice will be your final test and my last gift to you. When Evelyn finished reading, she realized she was crying openly. Sarah placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. He never stopped loving you, she said softly. Even at the end, he believed you could change. Evelyn sat in stillness, the weight of Nathaniel's final revelation washing over her. She stood slowly and walked to the window. San Francisco sprawled before her in its endless, tangled beauty, full of possibility, full of lives touched and yet to be touched. It no longer looked like a city of loss, but one of second chances. She thought of the Foundation, the lives they had changed, the clarity and fulfillment she had finally discovered. And then she thought of the life she had once lived. The clothes, the indulgence, the chase for more, all glitter, no gravity. She turned back to Sarah, her eyes clear, her voice steady. I think, Evelyn said, a quiet smile forming, the Foundation could do a lot of good with those resources. Don't you? Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, Evelyn Lancaster truly felt free. Sarah nodded, her voice soft. I think Nathaniel would be proud. The two women embraced. And with that, the last piece of Nathaniel Lancaster's grand design quietly fell into place. He had given Evelyn the ultimate test, not punishment, not retribution, but a choice. A choice to become who she truly was meant to be. In the end, betrayal had not led to destruction. It had led to transformation. Evelyn Lancaster had lost her world of wealth and influence, but she had gained something far more precious, the chance to redeem herself. To live the life Nathaniel always believed she was capable of. As the sun dipped low behind the hills of San Francisco, long shadows stretching across the bay, Nathaniel's final legacy took shape. Not in the towering buildings that bore his name, not in the fortune he had amassed, but in the changed heart of the woman he had loved. Evelyn Lancaster stepped out of her office and into the fading light, her face lifted to the sky, ready to begin again. A life of purpose, of quiet redemption, of a kind of wealth that could never be measured in dollars or diamonds. The game was over, and in the end, love, not betrayal, had won. If this story moved you and you're drawn to tales of growth, second chances, and the power of redemption, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might just change the way you see the world. The next video waiting for you is just a click away, filled with inspiration and truth. We'll see you there.